Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you all for joining us. We are graced by the presence of the beautiful Laura Mignott, CEO of DFlash and host of Reset Podcast. And we're really honored to have her here and have this discussion about why I care. So Laura, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to jump right into these kind of questions. And first one we're going to start with, and this is typically what we ask everyone, is really, why do you care? What inspired you to get involved with Creative Spirit and promoting employment and inclusion for people with IDDs?
Well, the reason I care is because, well, as somebody who has dyslexia and, for a long time hit it, I have a special degree of empathy for folks who have all types of IDDs. And I think it's so important to provide, empathy and grace and humanity to everyone. And, what the work that you all do at Creative Spirit is so important because, dignity in work and being able to take pride in your work means so much to everyone. And so it's just important to have spaces and communities that are able to help other communities get that dignity and grace. And so that's part of the reason why I think it's such a wonderful organization.
Agreed. I think we've talked a lot since October, which was when we started this campaign, to really focus on, the 75 years of National Disability Inclusion Awareness Month, and then also marking the 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think it's so interesting to hear everyone's perspective, because what we've heard, and I love that you said that in your response, is creating a safe space and a place for people to feel valued is a critical service. And I think that's great that's something that you found Creative Spirit was supplying. So thank you. So the second question we're kind of going to roll into, and this is a little bit more broad, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about what diversity and inclusion means to you. And what are some strategies or initiatives that you've implemented in your own work through either the Reset podcast or through your company and your services, and specifically in regards to improving inclusion for people with IDDs? We'd just love to hear your stance and some of those strategies.
Oh, that's a huge question, Joanna. Do you have 3 hours? I mean, they all intersect, but they all at the end of the day come down to empathy. And, from our standpoint, if you create environments where people feel included, valued, and respected, then you don't have to worry about building a diverse and inclusive culture, because that comes from the top. And, it's what we advise a lot of our clients. We do a lot of work with our clients around diversity, inclusion, and equity. Without actually saying it, it's like, how do you create great culture? And what are the things that you're doing where people want to be a part of this organization? And, in my career, prior to having my own company, I saw a lot of the pitfalls where there were bosses who treated people who had IDDs as if they were second-class citizens. And what I always strive for, that whenever I could be the person that I was the one that worked for everyone, I was like, of course you're going to be cool with folks. Like, why would you not? It's not about a handout or it's about being there to help people. Everyone has something. And oftentimes people don't want to share. As I said earlier, most people up until about a year and a half ago did not know I was dyslexic. Because I'm boss lady, blah, 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 and I speak a bunch and like yada, yada, yada. And people don't know what the struggle is on the other side of that. Because even as what I do, I didn't feel comfortable sharing that, because I didn't want people to think I was less than, that I was stupid. And that is for me, whereby, like, I'm not going to say that my challenge is on the kind of lighter scale, but it's more that, like, I know what that feels like. And so for me, throughout my career, whenever I've encountered people who have, IDDs, I've felt a kind of kinship with those folks. And I'm like, of course, like, how can I be helpful? But I do it with everyone. And I think that's the thing that people forget, that we're all human here. You know when you meet someone whether or not they've got good energy or whether you want to like, oh, this person's gonna be capped in dark cloud, let me keep on moving. And so I think if from an organizational standpoint, you live your values. Our company's core value is we design experiences to make people feel welcome. It has no caveats around that. It doesn't have an age, race, IDD, anything around that other than designed to make people feel welcome. And if you do that from the ground up, then you don't need this sort of transfusion of diversity and inclusion because you got yelled at or called out. It's that it's in the veins of the company. And if it's not, then you have to hire the people who can help build that kind of culture internally and then nurture that. Don't think of it as an afterthought. It has to be just as important as your typical, profit and loss statement or, what your sales might be. Making a diverse and inclusive space is of paramount importance within your organization. Because if you don't put it on that same level as where the money is, then it's always going to fall by the wayside. So it's so important to make sure that it's a level playing field for your organization, that as much as we care about our sales, we care about being the inclusive culture that we create. They must be on the same level.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think there's an humility in what you just said, but also it's an awareness of the realities of barriers, the realities of steps that still need to be taken to bring inclusivity to every organization and how it makes sense for each of them, and to do it genuinely, authentically, warmly, and welcomingly. I think that's a beautiful vision. And I think that that's something we're hopeful to see more of this year in particular. I think coming out of the pandemic and remote work and all the wonderful things that has done to break down some of these barriers. And the next question, I'm going to just kind of adjust a little bit. So let me know if you need a moment to think about it. No rush. But the original question we had was more around what are kind of some ways you feel progress has been made improving that employment for people with IDDs, and what are some places that there's room for growth. But I'm going to have an addendum to that because you have such a wonderful positive outlook, and I think it's a really valuable perspective because we are coming into Black History Month as well. So I just want to also bring this into kind of a broader cultural context of, people of color with disabilities are even more vulnerable when it comes to unemployment. And what are some steps do you think that can be taken to improve unemployment and inclusion and equity for not only people with IDDs, but specifically people of color with IDDs, which are, as we know, and that is such a vulnerable group of people. And I think it's just a great way that we can kind of jump into this, because I think it's an important topic that we need to start really propelling forward more this year in particular.
This all comes down to an economic and racial equity conversation. It's an economic justice issue. And obviously more people of color who have IDDs are at the lowest salary rungs and most highest levels of unemployment. A couple of things have to happen. One, I kind of go back to this like sort of transformative thing where I spoke at this event and talked about being dyslexic and how, it was a struggle for me with work on certain things. And the thing that came out of that conversation was that 4 women came up to me afterwards and said, "You are the first Black person we have ever met in our careers who has dyslexia. We're all dyslexic." And they were the first Black people I met that were also dyslexic, because I kind of thought in this industry, over the creative industry, I didn't think there were a lot of folks who were like me. And we had this like very beautiful conversation. There were some tears. And it was about the fact that, when they were throughout their careers, they kind of hit this wall whereby like sometimes their dyslexia overcame their work. And as a result of that, it led to having challenges at work, and it led to depression and oftentimes leaving jobs. And it was because they, one, didn't feel comfortable enough to share with their bosses that, some accommodations would be need to be made. Or, the way that they comprehend and learn and understand is just different. It's not wrong. It's just different. And you can make accommodations for this. Like we, especially in the creative marketing field, it's all kinds of things you can do. And what that, how that had made them stumble throughout their careers, and how they had wished if they had saw more people who looked like me and them earlier on, it would have given them, a good kind of like, at least pat on the back of it, like, look, this gets better. There are a million and one ways you can do this, and not and to embrace fully who they are, so they can, what they say, kind of bring your whole self to work. And so, obviously that, had a huge effect on me, because it's something whereby you realize that you can't see it, you can't be it. So I think a lot of it, I think, for a lot of creative folks, if you have an intellectual, if you have an IDD, tell people if you feel comfortable doing that, especially if you have kind of risen in the ranks, because I think visibility helps so much more, and being open and honest about the challenges you've had. It's not been easy. Like I often say that I'm lucky. I was, the way I have my quirks, and so I memorize things, and so like all the things that I was able to do to kind of help me thrive. But for some folks, it'll be different things, and I think the more that we hear those conversations, the more that people can see and hear how you were able to navigate this stuff through work, especially in the work environment. That's going to be key. Two, I think organizations have to be mindful of who their employees are. If you have an environment where people feel like if they don't do this thing exactly this way, they're going to be fired, then they're not going to come to you and tell you I have ADHD. They're not going to tell you that they are to a degree on the spectrum. Like, that's not going to happen. So the environments that you create within your organization has to be somewhere people feel comfortable sharing. Because from a racial side of the universe, there are lots of people who, there might be white men who are on the spectrum and they work in advertising as coders and such. And it's like, oh, you need headphones, you want to work at 1 a.m., you want to work from home, totally fine. And you don't see that when it comes to people of color. And so like, that's the problem. It's like, if the only folks who are the ones that you will give accommodations to happen to be straight white males, then like, we're not going to solve this problem. But if you say as a company, we want the best folks who are the most creative, who can do so many different amazing things, and you have an office whereby like it's okay to sort of share that, and it doesn't, you want regulated in the group of, well, you might, you're gonna be in this corner over here. Like, no one wants to be isolated and be othered. So if you can do a lot more together, that solves that problem. And then it also starts from an earlier side of the universe, is like what you guys are doing at Creative Spirit. And the more that you can get folks in to positions where there's, they can use their strengths, and they can be around folks who respect who they are and want to be helpful. Like, one of the things I hope that comes out of us all kind of being stuck home because of the pandemic is that there is a new kindness. Like, we have had a culture of meanness for way, way, way too long. I wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago. And, we have had this really, for the last 15, 20 years, kind of like, it's like on the path with reality TV being mean. And we've sort of seen the real world sort of reflect that meanness, where like being awful to people is sort of celebrated. Like, our previous president is a prime example of that. Like, making people feel bad, or like name calling. We've got to get back to like our better angels of being good to people, and understanding that everyone has a challenge. Like, there are no perfect people, and there's so many silent challenges that people don't know. If they have mental health challenges, if they have an IDD, if they're caregivers and for elderly relatives, or a sibling who may have a mental illness, you don't know. Like, everyone has something. But if we fundamentally come back to the place of like, let's be kind and good to people, that's how you create places where people want to work and want to stay. Because it's one thing when you get a job, like, okay, I got this job. But if I'm not being fueled in a way that feels authentic, or if I'm being made to feel that like I'm less than, you can't retain me. And from a business standpoint, if you create an environment whereby people come through, but then don't stay because of the environment, that's costing you more money anyway, because the amount of money it costs to rehire someone, retrain that person, do the search to find them, versus this is a place where you can work. And so that's the key. It's like building organizations that have this, and then welcoming everyone, and like not othering folks. And the more visibility that can be seen, by people of color who have these challenges earlier on. So like, I think about like elementary schools and junior high schools and high school and in college, the more that we up and down this road, you can see and reflect folks who have this, and you don't have schools who think, oh, well, the kid talks too much, so clearly they need to be in this class, versus, oh, look at that. I mean, if you look at what happened with Amanda Gorman, who just did that amazing poem at the inauguration, she had some sensory processing issues. She has stutter, but for having teachers and parents who were like, let's find ways to help her early on, then she's not going to be at the inauguration when she's 22. But her showing who she is and challenges that she's had to overcome, and look where she was, can inspire a whole new generation of little black and brown girls who are thinking, I have this, I might be different, but look where I can go. And so that's why I'm saying visibility is so classically important at this particular moment.
Absolutely. I love that. And it's so fascinating. Under the umbrella of IDDs, there's an interconnectedness, but there's differences, and those differences are powerful. And I love how you spoke about that, and each person is different, and each person needs the space, and each person needs slightly different accommodation. So I always say to Laurel, and this is just a whole nother conversation, but it's so fascinating because if we could start mapping and helping people understand themselves earlier on and how they learn and how they grow, those stepping stones to success as an individual with a disability will become so much easier, and you'll attract the right people of support, that bench of support that will get you through those things that come with being different, but also add to the strength of being different, which I think is so important as well. And I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, our differences are strengths. I mean, that's the thing. I always make this joke, like, the reason no one knew I was dyslexic until the same day I was in college. But like early on, there were some kind of funky signs. And it's like, I couldn't tie my shoes. I couldn't tell time on a watch. Every first sentence was the last sentence. And I spoke with a really bad stutter. But my mom told them, like, she's smart, give her more work and she'll sit over there and do it. And like, but for that, having an advocate and early on, my life's totally different. And I think that's the thing, as early as possible, the more you see us, you see the wide spectrum of uniqueness that's out there, the better it is for future generations to see that they're awesome and you can do amazing things. Everyone can be amazing in their own special way.
Absolutely. I love that. So I think it's the appropriate time to introduce Malcolm Repburn, who's one of my colleagues and is going to deliver the last few sentences. But
hey, Malcolm.
Yes, I really appreciated, all of your insights and everything you said about being someone living with a disability, and organizations can be more inclusive. So I just wanted to ask, for someone who has an IDD, from your experience, what are some strategies and advice that you would recommend to them if they're confronted with something like unconscious bias and the anxiety about revealing their disability to employers, maybe?
Well, and thanks for your question. I think the first thing is to find who your kind of champions and advocates in the organization are, and confide in that person. And that could be, a fellow project manager or someone who you've made friends with in HR, and tell them that you're having some challenges. Whatever's in darkness has to come into light. And I know that it's scary and challenging, but I do think if folks don't know, and again, it doesn't mean you have to go to your boss, but if you feel that there's been a situation, you have to go to somebody, and they can maybe go with you to HR or with you to go to your boss. Have that advocate with you, because it's better to have someone with you than to try and go this alone. I know how hard it is on your own to begin with to navigate this crazy world we live in on a daily basis, much less having to go through some bias issues or at work. So I would say try and find your best advocate, your kind of work buddy, talk to them about that and ask if, with like, hey, like, I want to talk to our boss, so can you come with me? So you have someone who can also advocate on your behalf, because look, you're there, you got that job. So there is someone there who knows how awesome you are. So find that person and work with that person to help navigate that conversation, but also call it out. Like, because oftentimes folks don't realize that they're being ridiculous. Like, remember this, a lot of folks don't know what neurodiversity is at all, and they don't know what IDDs are. And so there is a touch of a learning curve, but the kindness part of this and the empathy part of this is really important. And so if you don't know and someone tells you, then you need to make those changes within you so that you don't make that person feel uncomfortable. But delivering that message the best way you possibly can to someone who can go ahead and help, I think, is the key point.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're actually in the interview before actually having gotten the job, and the hiring manager or the person interviewing you is somebody who is expressing some kind of unconscious bias or discriminating against you, what do you think what would be the way, the ideal way that you could respond in that situation, or to try and make the person understand, or overcome those misconceptions that they're at?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance. I think, one thing could be like, you can say, listen, that's really ableist. Like, yeah. And they might be taken aback, but it's, when you're getting interviewed, you're also interviewing them. So never think that you're at the mercy of this interviewer, that you have to, like, they may say something inappropriate and you're just supposed to sit there and take that. Absolutely not. As I said, everyone has awesomeness in them. Everyone has goodness in them. And there's no universe where you should ever be treated to be made to feel less than. And if you're in a situation where someone says something to you like that in an interview, like, listen, hey, listen, that's just not appropriate. And this might not be I don't think this is the right place for me, and leave. Because and thinking about like, oh, I'm never going to have another interview. You absolutely will. If you got that interview, you'll get another one. But your dignity and your grace is not up for debate or for sale.
I was just reading an article before this interview where it said that it's illegal. It's actually illegal to ask somebody that question in an interview.
Absolutely. An employer cannot ask you if you have a disability in an interview. Period. Full stop. Always put yourself first in this situation. And I know it's scary, and I know that it can feel like, wait a minute, oh my gosh. But listen, you got that one interview, you'll get another one, and you're like, listen, I don't think this is the right place for me. I thank you for your time. And then
the next, really the last question. Actually, no, it's not. It's the second to last question. You have a lot of experience with podcasting, so I really just wanted to get your take on how you feel that can be utilized as a way to help people with disabilities with employment and inclusion.
Well, one of the things, again, part of the reason I did the podcast was because, again, I wanted people to see me, all of me, and also create a space for folks who come from all different walks of life. And so I've had all kinds of amazing people who have IDDs, have all kinds of unique challenges that they've thrived through. And, I think it's really important for folks to, one, see it, hear it, and understand people's journeys, because I think, again, a lot of times folks don't see, people assume because you see someone who's super duper awesome that they've never had a challenge. And I think the more that you can have experiences where you can hear from people who've gone through a lot of different things throughout their career, that can help inspire, but also kind of give you some good tips and tricks. And on the IDD front, podcast producing is another one of those skills that can go anywhere. Like, my editor has some challenges, and he is fantastic at editing my podcast. Like, he finds stuff that I don't even know, because he's so attuned to listening, and he can catch those little nuggets of goodness, and then he writes out these really great show notes. But he didn't know he could do that. But I was like, hey, go for it. And then but I also gave him the freedom to be like, listen, I'm not going to look. This is your show, and go for it. And so So the skills around editing and uploading those skills, creating like different kinds of graphics. Those are all really great skills that lots of folks who have IDDs can do quite well. And as the industry of podcasting continues to just explode, there are lots of different opportunities that you can use for future careers. And I would encourage folks to look into podcasting as a potential area for a career focus. If you're already cutting up stuff on like iMovie or using Photoshop or Lightroom, like all those skills are absolutely necessary in the industry of podcasting. So it's a great place to try stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, especially now because podcasting is so popular right now, it's definitely a way to a really great way to reach people through that. So if you're trying to send
Absolutely.
a message of inclusion and diversity for people with IDDs, I think it's a really great way to do that. So the last thing I was going to ask, I'm kind of wanted to transition to talking about COVID and the situation that we're in right now and how it's really changed the way a lot of organizations function. So I just wanted to hear, your perspective on what are some lessons that you think businesses or business leaders can really take away from the situation that we're in when it comes to hiring people with IDDs. And I also just wanted to know if you feel like there's something about where we are historically right now that makes this more urgent, this mission more urgent.
Yeah, I think there's never been a better time for employers to hire more folks with IDDs. Like this is the time. Like, because of the fact that this gives a level of accessibility that you could never have had before. So, for folks who, may have some challenges being in large crowds, like the big open plan offices where like everyone has to sort of commiserate at the coffee bar. This gives people an opportunity to hire more folks who that might be a challenge for them. This might be an opportunity for folks who, again, may work better in solitary environments at different times in different places, because it might be that folks have like moved home and so like it's much more comfortable for them to be in their home environment. Like this is a chance for you to hire more folks who you may not have been able to meet because they're in California and your agency or company might be in Michigan. So the broad spectrum and hiring pool is wider for you now in terms of the jobs that you can potentially hire people for. And the technology has caught up with the ability for folks to be a part of it. So it's not that like, oh my gosh, you're gonna need this special application or a special computer or what have you. Like, no, it's like you got Wi-Fi and a camera, right? And I think that there are wonderful opportunities right now for organizations to be smart about their hiring practices and to widen the pool of folks that they can hire. Organizations can do this. There's so many wonderful, beautiful ways that people with IDDs can get really incredible jobs that give them dignity and grace. And I think the challenge that I want for organizations is that like this is not out of pity or because you think it's a CSR initiative that you have to do to hire some folks. It's that like you have fantastic people like you guys on this call right now who can do wonderful work if given the opportunity and the space for grace and the opportunity to be accessible for any accommodations that you might need. Because if you do that, you're going to have a wonderful pool of employees, and your employees are going to want to, more employees are going to want to work for you, knowing that you have this inclusive space where everyone can work with you. And it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, you pushed some folks in this corner over here and like that's where they're going to be. Like, no, this is a integrated, wonderful community of employees that you have within your organization. So I would say for organizations, like now is the best time to work with companies like CreativeSpirit to find a really wonderful roster of of potential employees, have really great interviews, and then hire people and then retain them. The key for all of this is I don't want new people just to be hired. I want them to be retained. I want them to thrive within the organization. And so giving them everything that they need so they can be successful will only lead to more successful organizations. And so I think COVID gives us a really unique opportunity when we're all at home and we can make our homes, our offices in the most comfortable way we possibly can, that you can get more wonderful employees.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful insight. And I mean, do you feel like after COVID is gone, these changes can be permanent, or are things just going to revert back to the way they, business, the status quo?
I think at this point there is no before times. I think we are only going to go forward. I think it's an opportunity for growth and building and building careers for folks. And just like how, like, look, I'm in the events business, and when people ask me all the time, well, events are going to go back to normal. Like, no, they're not. We're never going back to like an event or an experience is 100% live and no online piece, because everyone has now seen that you can get more people to come to your event if 50,000 people can watch it online. Why would I not do that? I'm going to make more money. So same premise. If I can have really great people here in New York, but I can have a really awesome person who does this insanely awesome thing that I need done in Wisconsin, he or she ain't going nowhere. like, I will find a way to make sure that they have them in that organization, because we've now seen it. We've proved it. If you didn't exist, it'd be one thing whereby like, oh, the company doesn't work anymore, so like we don't have a job. But if that company is doing well and is thriving as a result of this sort of displaced workspace, you're not going to change that. This is helping you make money. This is helping you be profitable. So if it works, you got to keep it moving. And I think that's why I don't think there's any going back. I think it's only going forward. And so I think the opportunities are endless, provided people remember to again, treat people with dignity and grace.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think it's great that there could be kind of a silver lining to such a tragic situation like this, where it seems like, how could there be anything positive about it? But something, even terrible calamities can still give rise to something, something positive and come out of it. So, and, so I think that's definitely a good lesson. It's definitely a really good thing. So that was the last of my questions that we had prepared. So I just wanted to ask if there's anything else so that you wanted to add, or
Final thoughts? Sure. Well, thank you both. You're wonderful. As someone who does podcasting all the time, I know how nerve-wracking this can be. Great job. But more importantly, as I said, the more you can be visible at this particular moment, you never know how much you're going to help someone. Like I said, like I didn't really know what impact I would have by just kind of talking about the fact that I was dyslexic. Because again, I'd never looked at it as something huge in my life. I just kind of dealt and figured it out on my own. You can help so many people by just being out there, by living in your truth. I know it sounds like a book, but I do think that it's important for folks to know that you don't have to be in the shadows, and everyone has a whole lot of awesome in them. And the best ways to harness them, you'll find those ways. And the companies that are smart enough to embrace you are going to benefit so much. This is about finding your grace in everything that you do. And if you're a leader, have empathy, create spaces where people want to be a part of it and can come to you when they have challenges. And if you do that, then we'll hopefully make the world a better place.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. And it's really wonderful speaking with you and everything. And I'll just let Joanna, join in also.
I agree. I think everything that Malcolm said was spot on. I just love that we can have these conversations because it helps me grow. It helps those who listen learn, and it gives representation where it needs to be at this point. So I thank you for your time, because it's so valuable and important, and reminding us the important lessons that we need right now to keep moving forward when it's difficult. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.